thank y'all for having me. This is like my favorite meetup, so that's I'm super pumped to be talking about it. A couple caveats. I'm not very good at calculus, so I apologize in advance to all the several people I've talked to before this presentation that are way better at me than me. So I'm sorry. Buyer beware. All right, so who am I? I work for the New York Times. I like writing in Haskell, but I'm forced to write in things like JavaScript. At least I don't have to write Node. I work on the Interactive Times news desk, which means we're the desk that doesn't do the cool maps, with a bunch of other fine colleagues here as well. We basically work in the newsroom with news desks to produce interactive content. One of the things I'm really into is fashion. I mean, not like I don't espouse it, but like I'm into it intellectually. And so I use Haskell to analyze Fashion Week and to break down collections into these like minimalistic fingerprints or whatever. So that's like one of the things I use Haskell for. I've also worked in the World Cup, Ghost Soccer, and some other stuff. You haven't used it probably. It's not that cool. But my background is I went to college for a really profitable career in film and analytic philosophy. But when both of those fell through, film because I wasn't willing to starve, and analytic philosophy because no one was willing to actually listen to me about it, I decided to move into journalism, where I have the bully pulpit, more or less, and computer science is an easier way to get into journalism than actually being good at it. So that's my story. So, this paper. Now, why do I love this paper? This is a rent joke for all you theater nerds. So, why do I love this paper? I love this paper because when you start learning about Haskell and you start doing kind of functional programming, you hear all these terms thrown around, like algebraic data types. It could just be a name that someone gave it because they were like, this is catchy, or maybe there's some algebra behind it. I didn't know. And this paper kind of explains that, or kind of at least plays on that, makes some new connections off of it. This paper is the one that I read when I was first kind of getting started in the typed programming world, and it made me start to ask myself, well, what if you just consider types like ordinary values? What's gained? What's lost? Can you do that? And that kind of sparked a lot of ideas in me, and it was really exciting to me, and I hope it's exciting to y'all as well. Also, a little later, once I found out about the silver bullet that will save the world, dependent types, I wanted to know, like, well, why are they cool? Other than like, my ability to write like really cool, like DSLs and stuff like that, right? And this paper kind of says, hey, here's a really cool meta-programmatic use you can put dependent types to. Probably? It actually says that. It says, well, I mean, in the end, it'll be like, this might be cool one day, but we can't really do it right now. Can we do it now? Maybe. And also, I really like it because what Michael Bernstein said about how the best papers are the ones that draw connections between various kind of far afield concepts in computer science and math. And I think he used some word like the profane world or something like that. And I think that this paper really does that nicely. So that's there's a lot of the reasons I love it. So how did I read it? Well, I started in this place of deep agony. The first several times I read it, I was like, wait, does he really mean that kind of? Yeah, he does mean that kind of derivative. Okay. Do I know how to derive things still? I'm not sure. Possibly. The second point was he pretty early on lays his bona fides on the table, like thunk, and saying like, I was exploring these types and I realized these were the derivation rules I learned as a child, and I was like, oh my gosh, he is like light years ahead of me. I didn't learn I just had this vision of him as like a small boy, like the first one. Yeah, so that was intimidating, but I pushed through it. Also, I kept forgetting how associativity worked in the symbolism, so I was like, wait, is that equal sign grouped with that? So that took me a little while, but once I got it, I think I'm doing it right. It made it a lot easier, and finally I was like, wait, what's a fixed point again? So about 50% of the time spent preparing this presentation, I was on like the fixed point Wikipedia page. But then it really moved from agony to ecstasy, because I started learning these things. I started becoming much more comfortable with like what an algebraic data type is, what a fixed point is, what a zipper is, and hopefully at the end of this talk, for those of you who aren't already totally fluent in these terms, you'll be a little more comfortable with that as well. And then also, I learned all the calculus that I wish I would have learned in college, but I didn't because I didn't take any useful classes. Interestingly enough, as I was reading this paper, I got into this discussion of like Oxford brackets and denotational semantics, and I realized that the analytic philosophers and the computer science field developed these two identical concepts simultaneously and weren't entirely aware of their connection, because I had conversations with my professors about this, and I thought that was kind of funny. Anyway, so first, let's start. I want to start with a little background, make sure everyone's on the same page about types, fixed points, zippers, holes, all these kind of things. If you already know all this stuff, cool, just focus on your beer. So first, there's this idea of regular types, algebraic types. He uses these kind of terms a lot in the paper. And what do they mean? Well, it's not entirely different than, it's not different than regular types. It's like a way of combining types, making kind of more complex types, things like that. And I'm just going to go through some of the basic ones and like the terms I'll be using for them, the terms the paper uses for them, so that when we see them later, you won't be like, what does that mean? So first, we have the empty type, often written by this nice little combination of characters, underscore, pipe, underscore, and nothing is an instance of the empty type. There are no empty type, there's all or nothing in the empty type. There's a controversy about whether or not Haskell has a true empty type, and that's the kind of controversy that's really fun if you don't have lots of fun in your life. And that will often represent by 0. Cool. Unit will often represent by 1 in this kind of world, and units where there's exactly one instance of a specific kind of type, like say your leaf type in a tree or something like that, or maybe your empty list type in a list constructor. We all good so far? Make all sense? Awesome. One note, sometimes you'll see like 2s and 3s, and that is shorthand for like 1 and 1 and 1 or something like that. So if you see a 3, it can be one of 3 different things. You see 2 maybe, you might see a 2 around here. It's like, so think, like booleans, right? It can be true or false. There are 2 different things it can be. Cool? We all good? Awesome. Then there's like, I don't really know what the word for like just a type is, but basic type, typey types, I don't know. And those you'll see sometimes represented by a single variable or like an int. It's like a type. You have like an infinite number of them sometimes. Cool, whatever. Okay, so then you can, these are like the algebraic ones, right? These are like the algebra and the algebraic data types. Product and subtypes. Now product means you have 2 subtypes or whatever simultaneously. So like a pair of an int and a string, you can see that as a product of the int type and the string type. You have both of them at the same time. Say if you guys are like a C Go guy, right? Structs, right? Okay, my struct has name and date or something like that. That's a product type of name type, string probably, and date type, date type. Cool? All good so far? And we'll represent that by a times sign, which will be confusing because it'll look like X's because I don't know how to format things like with LaTeX. Get ready. Then you have some types. Some types are like alternative types, or types, either types. I believe sometimes they're also referred to as coproduct, which is not clear. I'll call them subtypes, and you draw them with a plus sign. So this means this is as Haskellians will recognize, the maybe type constructors. So either your maybe type is nothing, or it's just and then some integer. So this means and, this means or. We all good? Awesome. Now there's 2 other types, well actually 3, but I won't even get into weakening because I don't think it's essential to understand the paper. But he talks about definitions and recursive types. So what do I mean by these? So you'll see that if you read the paper, whoa, quick show of hands. Who read the paper here? Good, good. I mean, I kind of read it too. You're in good hands. So definitions are basically, like imagine you had some kind of parametric type like list X. If you guys have done Haskell before or functional programming or anything like this means a list of some X kind of some things, right? So I can make like a list of integers, right? And I can fill that in by defining X to be X. He goes on a spiel about he's using definition instead of substitution, so he doesn't have to handle like unfolding things and recursively substituting. So definition does the job because it just kind of at the place of binding does the replacement. Cool. Don't need to know that. Just think when you see this little pipe and then an equal sign, like you can kind of replace this with this, more or less. So here for instance, if I have list of X equals either. We'll go over our algebras again, algebraic data types. Either an empty list or a product of some X and then a list of X's. If you guys have seen list type signatures or whatever in a language like Haskell before, this should look really familiar. A lot of people have probably seen this, right? So then I could say, well, I mean, abusing this formalism a little, I'll define x to be integer, right? And now I'm working on lists of integers. Cool? If you see this, will you be like, I kind of know what that is? Yeah? Okay, good. So then, what does this mean? Because you see this a lot. Mu x dot f. Okay. What does it mean? And this is the, as Wikipedia will tell you, this is the fixed point operator. Sometimes you'll see the word least attached to it. There's a difference, but I'm not going to get into it. Basically, a fixed point of a function is something you can put into the function that comes out unchanged, right? So like, say my function is like double. If I put 0 into that, it comes out, it's still 0. 0 is a fixed point for the function double. Cool? And so you can represent this as, you know, f of its fixed point equals that fixed point.
Can we conflate that with unit?
No, it's, I mean, in Haskell, for instance, undefined is a fixed point of like almost every function or something like that. And so that's a lot of times people will talk about it like that, but it's really what can you pass into a function so that it comes out unchanged.
Well, identity doesn't count?
I don't think I would call it that.
Everything's a fixed point of identity.
Everything's a fixed point. There we go. That's a good example. Everything's a fixed point of identity. That might make things clear. Oh, no. Anyway, but type constructors are just functions, right? Okay, so we can have a fixed point of a type constructor. So let's take a type constructor like this. Either you have 0, z, right? Or you have s of some x, right? And I'm sure someone has seen this before. What does this kind of look like to somebody? Anyone want to yell it out? What has the type signature of this? Maybe? It's similar to maybe. It's also, what? Exactly, successor and natural numbers, right? But what would we put in this x to actually make this the natural number type signature? Well, we put this whole thing in that. So how do I represent that? So for example, if I say nat equals z plus s nat, you can see how it's like recursive. It's referring to itself. And that's what we will be using the fixed point operator to mean. So what exactly do I mean? Well, you can kind of, it's kind of this guy. You can read mu x dot f kind of as the fixed point of f over x. So why do we use fixed point combinators? Well, we use them to represent recursion when, like in a lambda calculus, we might not have let bindings, and we can't refer to functions by their name or something like that. So right here, we can say, okay, well, I want to put this whole thing into this x. Well, that's what we use this to represent. So again, how do we make this into natural numbers? Oh, well, this is the kind of way that this paper would formalize the natural number type signature. So imagine I said, okay, well, fx equals 1 plus x. What can I put in this x place so that it remains unchanged? Well, I can put the whole thing in because it'll essentially just keep going further and further in. So let's say I define nat to be the fixed point of f. Well, and then I just do my substitute. So I define nat to be the fixed point of f. Okay. What is my definition of nat fixed? Well, f of the fixed point equals the fixed point. I just turned it around. Cool. So then I'm going to just substitute fix f equals 1 plus fix f because I just applied this to this function, 1 plus x to fix f, so 1 plus x. And then I just substitute back out to nat, and I say nat equals 1 or, successor of nat. Again, that might be a little unclear because who's got time for all that theory? So you can just read mu x dot f as the recursive type f in which we substitute f for x's recursively. That's kind of how I read the paper.
Silly question. So everything after the period applies. It's not like the one. If we were to put parentheses around it, it would go up to everything after the period.
Yeah, so this is a problem I had with the paper too. Like I wish I wanted more parentheses and things like that. So they'll write this in the paper, and this means it's like if you're writing like a lambda or something, it'd be like /x arrow 1 plus x or something like that. So it's like after there's
the whole 1 plus
everything past the period.
All but everyone.
Right. So yeah, so it's probably easier to think of it this way. So again, like nat could be nat could be represented like this. So either you have the 0 type or a successor of something type. A list of integers can represent it by either you have the empty list or you have an integer and then another list, an integer B tree, which is a wonderful kind of combination of type that I made is either an empty B tree or like a leaf node rather, or an integer and 2 B trees. And yeah, so again, if you see this guy in the paper and you're like, how do I read this? I think in a pretty easy way, if you're not super comfortable with fixed points, and I don't think a lot of people are, is just to say, well, I kind of just substitute this whole thing for y, and that's how I express my recursion. Does that more or less make pretty much sense? Like on a scale of like 1 to 90, if we're somewhere around 74, then we're probably good. So if we're in there. What?
90 makes sense.
90 makes absolute sense. Like, you are Conor McBride. So now we're going to move on to zippers and holes. Yeah. So what are zippers? Well, as the paper that he cites explains, zippers are like Velcro for trees. So moving on. So what are zippers? Well, you have this problem if you have immutable things. And the question is, if your data structure is immutable, how can we get fast access to the children and parents of any node, right? Say we have this big tree and we're like in the middle of it, and we want to be able to really quickly, immediately, right, go to its children or its parents, right? Normally, the way you do that if you had pointers or something like that is on each node you'd store like, it would kind of be like a linked list or whatever, you'd store like pointers backwards and forwards. But if you can't do that, right, and if there's some reason you can't do that, you want an immutable type, how are you going to do it? Well, you'll just turn it inside out like a return glove. Which is the other way the paper explains zippers, right? So it's pretty easy. Well, they're used for some stuff, but anyway. They're often used for, one example that comes up, I think, on the Haskell wiki is like, zippers are great to implement mazes. Which I think, that's why there's a little minotaur there. It's a treatment. So, because a lot of us are like professional maze designers, I know. Am I at the right meetup? So you can use zippers to kind of represent your position in a maze. Say you were making like Doom or something like that. Okay, cool. Okay, great. Zippers are great. Okay, how to make them? So let's say we have this tree, and in this tree, for the purposes of how I want to do B trees, binary trees in this sense, we're not going to worry about like sorting or anything like that. We're just going to really worry about, and we're going to put the values at the branch, and then leaf nodes just are empty. There's just nothing there. Cool? So you've probably seen something like this before. The tree is either an empty leaf node, boop, 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 the little tiny circles, or it's a branch node with a value and then 2 subtrees. We've seen this tree formulation probably before, right? So how do I say I'm focused on this area right here. I want to drive a hole into my tree. How do we do that? Well, it kind of first attempt, maybe we'll split it at the focus. We'll store the top tree, and then we'll store everything below the tree. And maybe we'll add another type called like hole or something like that, and we'll mark it there. It's not a bad idea. We're actually pretty close, right? The problem is, if I have this, I can very easily get to the children of this focus by just, it's at the top level now. But how do I get back up to its parents? If it's really complicated, it might not be entirely trivial. It wouldn't be entirely trivial to do. So this is where the turning inside out like a real turn glove comes. What the zipper actually does is it stores the left and right children of the tree. Cool. But then it stores a path that you walk down from the top of the tree so that you can get to your focus, rather than just storing this as a tree. So basically what it does is at each node it says, okay, did we go to the left or to the right to get to our hole? So we start at 1, okay, cool, got it right here. Then how do we get to our hole? Well, we take the left path, boop, and then what do we pass by? Oh, we pass by this tree. That's what this is. So boop, boop, boop. That could be arbitrarily complicated, it would all fit right here. And in here we only have 1 step to get to our hole. And the reason that this is useful is because it allows us to make a simple, immediate operation to find the parents or the children of a zipper. And this is why it's called a zipper, because if you look at this operation, this is what it looks like to zip up the tree, and this is what it looks to zip down the tree. It actually kind of looks as if the tree, your tree structure is zipping together or unzipping, because basically all you have to do to move up is you take the path that you came from to get there, and then you kind of push it onto the zipper, and then everything else becomes its children. And to zip down, you just choose one of its children, and then add your current node to the path. So let's look at this in motion, all right? Ready for this? Okay. Right now we're at a specific node. It has a child of 4 and a child of 5. The actual node we're on is 2. Cool. And the path that took us here was one left turn, passing one and passing the one branch, and the tree to the right is this tree. So how do we zip down to 4 or 5? Well, first we have a new context, woo, and then we say, okay, well, what are the children of the thing we're moving to? Because in this example, we're moving to 5, right? So we can copy its children right down. Okay, cool, that's great. We're in business. So now we have to write the path. Well, this doesn't change at all, right? We still had to take the path to get to where we were before to get to the next part. Sweet, copy it down. Awesome, great. We're in business. Okay, now which way do we go from there? Well, 4 was on the left, 5 was on the right. We went right, so, okay, we went right. We passed by our old value that we're at. And then the remaining part that we didn't see was the B4 thing. So just to go back to this slide real quick, basically what we did was we started out right here, and then to move to this 4, we just took another. Oh, sorry, this isn't my original tree. I'm so sorry. So we were here, then we went left. So we just add the path that we had onto here, and now we have a 4 as our context. So you don't have to know how to implement zippers for this paper to make any sense. You just have to know basically their rationale, and more or less that's it. A zipper, but there's one thing you need to keep in mind that is pretty, come on. Oh, Jesus. Oh, no. And there we go. Okay. So one thing you have to keep in mind is he talks about holes, not zippers. So a zipper is just like a hole, one-hole context rather, with that hole filled in some way. So you say, oh, I'm at this point in the tree, the value's 2, whatever. But it's one-hole context is all the parts of the zipper that aren't actually the value that you're currently on. Okay? So what is a hole? Well, a hole describes, given some type T that contains x's of sort X, of type X, we're looking for a type that describes a T with 1 removed. Or you can think of it as a T with a focus in place of one of the x's. It's a way to kind of drill down and focus on one x. Cool. Keep in mind that one-hole contexts are always with respect to some internal type. Great? Does that make sense? Like you can't just say, oh, what's the one-hole context of my tree? Well, of what in your tree? You just get a question? Oh, you kind of front at me? So again, oh, sorry.
So it would be like a context of the interior type of a branch.
Exactly.
A number, like if it's an int, it would be
Int. Bingo, exactly. And that's a really good point. If we wanted to, we could have one-hole context of branches or something like that as well. But we always have to have a one-hole context of a certain type. And then, with respect to a certain type. And then finally, just to put it all together, a zipper is the one-hole context of a binary tree of x's, in the Hewitt sense, right? And the value that was removed. So it's not like one-hole contexts and zippers are that different. It's just like a zipper has a little extra to let you keep zipping back up and down. Okay, cool. So now to get to the actual paper. That's all the pre-legwork. We've warmed up, we've heard about zippers, and now it's time to turn to Leibniz and his wonderful rules of derivation. Or Newton, I don't want to take sides.
So I want to get in the middle of that fight.
Yeah, no, that's a train, I can't stop. So we're going to be talking about some derivation, and it might be a little painful, but I warn you, in another world it'll be worse. So I'm going to sketch the childhood of Conor McBride as illustrated by this paper. So he was looking at a pair type and a triple type, right? I'm going to tell a little story. And he wrote out his algebraic data type for the pair. Int times int. Makes sense, right? Made sense to everyone? Everyone got that? To make a pair of ints, you need an int and another int. Okay, cool. Let's write out the type for triple. Int, int, int. 3 triples. Product of 3 ints. Great. We know some math. We're good at math. We're cool guys, cool girls. So int times int, that's int squared. I think I can do that. I mean, you can't write this in Haskell or something like that, so it might not even be a real thing you can do, but okay, sure. Int squared, int third. Great. Okay, cool. So what's the context type for a pair? So if I want to be able to describe a specific position in the pair by removing something and replacing it with a hole, how can I do that? Well, he goes, well, I can write down the thing that hasn't been replaced by a hole, let's say 2, and then I can say whether or not the left or the right side was removed. Okay, so if I want to put a hole right here, I say, okay, well I removed the left component, and the other component was 2. Makes sense? Pretty much. Cool. So how do I do that with triples? Well, okay, say I want to make a hole in the 2 here. Well, the other values are 1 and 3, great, and I remove the middle value. Seems easy enough, okay? So let's write the type of this out. Okay, well, this can be one of 2 things, so 2, and times int, 2 times int. It's a fine type. And let's look at this type. Well, this can be one of 3 things, left, middle, right. There's a 3. Product int squared. Okay, so before I had int squared, and now I have 2int for its one-hole context type. Previously I had int cubed, and now I have 3 times int squared. Where have I seen that? Oh, I saw that as a child when I was doing my derivatives, and this is the power rule, right? If for those who didn't have such a robust childhood, you may remember the power rule to take the derivative of something to some other power. You take the power, make it the coefficient, and reduce the power by 1. I hope I haven't gotten that wrong at least, because if that calculus rule is wrong, the whole paper's down to him. So this was his kind of aha moment. This looks like the power rule to me. Int squared to 2 times int, int third to 3 times int squared. Okay, how far can we take this? Because this is what mathematicians and people like us love to do. We see, is this just a coincidence? Could be a coincidence. So let's just take it to its extremes, okay? So his big idea is maybe, just maybe, to find the type of a context for some type t, some regular type t, with a hole in the place of some x. Remember I said all one-hole contexts are such with respect to some internal type. Take the partial derivative of t with respect to x. Now we've got a theory. We've got a theorem or something like that. We've got something we can try to prove, and we can even write it in math. So let's take a look at it from the other way. And we could also say the way that we find the partial derivatives with respect to x of some type is answering the question, how can we find x's inside of t's? This is a very literal interpretation of how can we find x's inside of a recursive data structure. So when we're doing, oh yes?
What's the importance of the holes?
To the world or to this paper?
This, what you're talking about.
So the one-hole context is, so to go back, in this, is that how I go back? Yeah. So a context, when I say holes, I'm using the 2 words interchangeably, one-hole context and hole and context. I'm just kind of lumping them all together. So a hole, I'm just using a shorthand for the phrase one-hole context, which is some data structure with one of its things focused on and removed. Sorry, that's my bad. Yes, so, and again, the uses for holes are spurious possibly, but anyway, we'll go to that. So let's take derivative types, because I know that's why you guys are all here, all right? Okay, let's take some derivative stuff. Okay, first, what's the partial derivative with respect to x of 0? 0, cool. But now what does this mean? What does it say about types, right? What does it say about types? Well, it says, where can we find an x in an empty type? Where are x's? Nowhere, they're not there. So they're nowhere. The answer to an empty instance is its own empty context. Great. Okay, where can we find x's in a single, like a singleton or something like that? Where can we find x's in leaf? Well,
It's the whole, right?
what?
It's the whole.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's an and.
Sorry, I said it wrong. Where can we find x's in the type that x is, right? Where can we find x's in int? Where can we find ints in int? Well, it is int, so it's itself. It is 1, right? So if you have an int, how do I get a hole, an int hole in that int? Well, there's only one way to do it. That's it. It is it. It's the hole. Int to unit. Cool. Now, what I meant to say earlier was, how do I find x's in a type that isn't it? How can I locate ints in string? Can't.
How about JavaScript?
What? Yes, that's the answer. That's the answer. Out of parsec is actually the correct answer. No, you can't find ints inside of the string type or inside of any other type other than int. It's just not there. So we find no x's in a y. We'll get into the question of what happens if that y type has x's in it. But what we have to do for the sake of this is we have no other information. We have to assume that it's not in it. And he talks about we always do this operation at the place of binding. So anyway, some types. Okay, how do we find x's in an s or a t? Just intuitively, without knowing any calculus. You say, well, I have it's either an s or a t. How do I find x's in that structure? Either they're located in the s, or the t. So we can find x's in s or t by saying either we find an x in an s or the x in the t. And this is also how you take this derivative as well. So this context of a sum is the sum of context, right? So say I can either have a left int or a right int, right? They're like, you know, like, I don't know. I don't exactly know what this type would be useful for. But maybe it's like some kind of, you know, dirty ints or clean ints, right? So if I'm looking for an int, well, either I can find it in the left, okay, I have a left hole or I have a right hole. So one of two things. I can just represent that by either the result left or right. Cool. So now we get to go into something a little more difficult. The product rule. This is probably where a lot of people start, you know, phasing out in high school, tuning it out. If you unless you like calculus, then it's great. You probably remember this easily. So how do I find x's in s and t, right? In a product of s and t. Well, calculus will say, well, we do it by finding x's in s and then recording t, or by finding x's in t and recording s. And that's also intuitively how we would do it in types, right? And so in intuitive explanations, either we find the x in an s and then record the other t, you know, because we can't just throw that information away. We have to know what its partner was. Or we find the x's in the t and then record s. So let's just consider for a second, just to slow it down a little bit. We're looking for int contexts. So some int, right? In a pair of int and string. Now, we probably immediately know what the answer to this is going to be, right? Because I already said, well, it can't be in strings. There's really only one place we can find ints. But let's just work it out in terms of the product. So we have int times string. So what this says is to find the partial derivative of the product, or to find the context of the product, what we should do is this operation. And then we say, well, based on the rules back 2 slides, right? We find ints in exactly one place. We find ints and strings nowhere. We substitute that in, and what we get is we get 1 times string plus int times 0. That anything times 0 equals anything times 1 equals itself. So when we actually, I was expecting to cheer when I said that. So what we get back is string. And you say, well, why is that the context? Well, if I'm taking out an int, there's only one place I can take it out. So to put a hole here, all I need to do is record the other string, because there's only one place the hole can be.
I don't want to get into things. Does he talk about the generating function
No.
context of all this? Because
I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I don't really know a lot.
Because it's just in combinators, it's just my thing, you know, you can write things as polynomials and take the derivative of them, and it's basically the same thing.
Sounds reasonable.
The difference is that those would be, you know, combinatorial objects rather than types, but I don't know if that's a really real difference at all.
It might be. That'd be a good thing to investigate. I don't think so, though. I think that you'll see that they're probably isomorphic or something like that. That's a word that mathematicians like to use, right? Maybe it's true. Okay. It's isomorphic.
I think as long as you stick to something that's in some categorical sense finally generated, you're probably fine. Because we're actually playing pretty fast in this with a lot of isomorphisms here. Specifically, 1 times string is string. That's not string. It's uniquely isomorphic to string. And we did that earlier when we took the derivative of type x relative to x. Being 1, it's actually uniquely isomorphic to 1.
Yeah.
Because there's an x tagged in it. And so we're really just doing counting procedures in finite set if you want, in which case you could apply generating functions.
Yeah,
I don't know what those things are, but this sounds right. I didn't math.
Function literature.
But so you're cool with just things being uniquely isomorphic?
Yes.
Because that trips me up with the derivative of x respect to type y. Because type y could be isomorphic to x. So
he gets into that. And basically, I think what he basically says is, you know, you'll have to do this at any point in which you start evaluating it. You can't do it like a priori and just make sure you have it right. So at the point of binding, right, I'll just keep doing it internally. But what we'll see in a second is in chances where we can have these x's nested into other types, how we can resolve that. But I think in general, in that case, you're supposed to kind of assume that y is like a base. There's nothing inside. There's no other types inside of that. Except, like, you know, it just represents one other thing. But yeah, I agree with you. That was the thing I thought about, but like I didn't know enough to actually resolve. So anyway, so how do we take derivatives of definitions? Well, they're a little bit of a problem because, and this is kind of what you were talking about a little bit, but a context for x could either be at the base level of f, in which we're fine, right? Or it could be inside of the s type that we're substituting in for. So we can't just take the partial derivative of f because we have extra information. So as he says, it's really simple. All you have to do is apply the multivariable chain rule in the special case in which the first function applied to the first argument is the end. No, it actually doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does, but I don't want to really get into it. What he eventually says is he says the partial derivative of definition, we find x's. Remember, we're going to talk about this in an intuitive sense, right? We find x's in f's where y is defined to be s by either finding them at the top level of the f structure, right? So maybe it's like we're looking for an int, and it's glued on right at the top level of the structure. It doesn't even matter what y is. We don't even care about that. Or we have to pick out a specific one of the y's in the top structure and then look for the x inside of that, right? And I'll show you some examples of what that means in a second. But I think it makes more sense. So basically, you're either if you're looking for x's in f where y equals s, either your x is at the top level of f, and you don't care about what's in the y, or your x is inside of the y, and then you have to record which y and then find it inside of that. This is kind of like what we do with the tree, right? Where we said either we're already at the level where we're looking for our hole, or we have to say which way we went, left or right, and then find our hole inside of that, okay? So, here's an example here. Say I have this parametric type foo y, where it's a pair of string in the whatever y is, right? And I'm defining y to be integer, right? And I want to find an int context. Okay, that's great. So either, right, I have my int context already here, which I don't, and that will reduce to 0. Or I have it inside of the y, which I do, in which case it'll reduce to 1 times string, and then we just have the string type like we saw earlier, right? So either it's already here, which is not, but it could be, or it's inside of that y, in which case we will write down its like environmental information and go deeper, which is exactly what we do when we choose strings. So let's take a quick breather. There's a lot to get through, and we still have recursive derivatives to get through. So, all right, okay. So now, how do we take the derivative of a recursive type, right? We haven't really dealt with that yet. So what he says is, well, first let's expand the recursive type into a definition. We'll say the type is f, right? And then we'll define all x's in that type to be the fixed point of f with respect to x. Okay, that's fine. That makes sense. But you basically, that's the definition of like recursion in a sense, right? So, okay, that makes sense. And then basically he just applies the definition rule that we saw back here, right? Does the same thing. So what we look for over here is we say, well, either you find your x at the top level, right? Or you have to find it one level deeper, and you have to record which choice you made to get there. This is, again, either you find it at the top level of the tree, or you record left or right, and then you look for it one level deeper. But do you see why this doesn't help us, this specific definition? Because right here is the thing we were trying to find in the first place, right? So we've just kind of postponed our problem. So this is what we needed in the first place. Oh no. Okay. So he says, like in like one like amazing like sentence, like clearly this is isomorphic to this. And if we really wanted to, which I'm sorry. I can't read it. And intuitively, it actually makes sense why the two would be isomorphic, right? Because if at every level we're either taking the level we're at or digging deeper into it, we can kind of think of that. What else is either stops or goes one level deeper into the thing itself? It's a list, right? That's the description of a list. Either we are an empty type of a list, right? Or we have a head consonant to a tail, right? So what he says is, and again, this does make sense if you really stare at it long enough until like your eyes cross. What he says is, well, what we can do is we can just represent this kind of thing right here, this going deeper, as a list of deeper taken steps. Does that kind of make sense? Sorry,
can you just, I may have missed this. Where did y come from?
Oh, so y is in this example, where did I put y from? Y came from, did I make a spelling error somewhere? Oh no, the y just represents one of the like container types. So what he says is if you're just continually going down a list, down steps, maybe it's at the top, right? In which this case, this list would be empty. And then you could just record the context right here. Or maybe you have to take a bunch of steps down, so I'll record all those steps, and then once I get to the level where I find my x, then I can just, I can just say where the x was at that level. So it kind of makes sense why these two are. In fact, in the paper, he doesn't show how he derives that. I don't know if he had a stroke of genius. I don't know if there's some math rule that he applied that he fails to share with us. I don't know if I'm just real dumb. But he basically says, oh, this is isomorphic to this, obviously. Because it's a list of steps until you get to your holes level, and then the context at that level. But I think that kind of makes sense, actually, because we've seen that with zippers already. And we know that if we have a recursive type, we just peel away the levels until we get to the level we want to be at, and that's the list action. And then we get there and we show where at that level that thing is. So that's cool. And I don't think this slide actually is very useful. I may have this like little A2 where it's like, oh, we kind of are encoding a sum with a list. Are we factoring by something? No, let's not even get into that. Because it's probably wrong, right? So we have this type, right? A list of steps until you get to your holes level, and then it's context at that level. Well, where have we heard of those things? Well, flash back to a long time ago, like 15 minutes ago, right? This is exactly what the zipper was. A list of steps, path, right? We choose left or right. We record when we pass by, and then we eventually get to the level that our thing is at. So this, we found this is the zipper type, right? So it seems like we're on the right track. So let's just test this out. So time to do a little mechanical stuff. So what's the OneHole context for the list? Well, let's write the list type, okay? A list of x's, right, is either an empty list, cool, or the product of an x and another list, so the head and the tail. Does that make sense to everyone? We've all seen this before, a lot of us have probably seen this before. Cool? Does that make sense? Did I hear that? Okay, that's so cool. So then, or we could just write this as, this whole thing as, right? And remember I said, read this as, I'll substitute this whole thing for the y in here. So, which is basically the same thing. This is way clearer, but say I couldn't actually call it list, then I would write it like that. So I don't actually want to really go through the steps with you because I think that it's not very interesting. It works. And then eventually what you get is you get lists, a product of lists and lists. Now does this make sense? Does it make sense to say that a hole in a list is a product of two lists? Why does that make sense? Anyone want to shout it out? Exactly. It's the prefix and the suffix.
But it's worth pointing out that the list that comes before it, all the pointers are pointing to the left. Like they're pointing the opposite way. They're pointing away from the hole.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the way that we'd have to write some kind of operation if we actually wanted to write something kind of algorithm on this list zipper, which I've heard people call it, is you assume that tail operations and head operations are equal cost or something like that, which, why not?
And the prefix or the suffix could be empty as well, right?
Absolutely.
And the tail or the head is an empty list, the whole, and then the rest of the list.
Exactly. So if our whole was at 1 instead of at 2, then we would have the product of the empty list and then 2, 3, 4.
Sorry, could you clarify that person's point? So does that mean that the prefix would be written backwards?
No.
Like if the whole was at 3, it would be list 1, 2.
Yeah. It would be list 1, 2, and then 4.
Okay.
I was just saying that if you actually wanted to write some kind of algorithm that operated on that to zip it back and forth, you'd have to say to move it 1 to the left, you would take the tail, make that the new hole, the new hole, or just rather, yeah. And then
if you're implementing with a pair of singly linked lists, then the prefix would be a reverse list.
Okay, so it would be reversed and similar. Okay.
I think I can verify. If you were actually implementing it manually, it would be that. The way that Conor derives it, it is not that.
Right.
Oh, okay.
It's just plain inefficient.
And also, yeah, I mean, we don't implement things. If we can write their type signatures, the program's written, right? No? Okay. So then, and then you can do the exact same thing for the context for binary
Can you
tree.
go back to that last
sorry.
slide? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That was fun.
Oh yeah, so basically, just to sum up, if we wanted to find the whole in a list, we would choose which thing we're taking out, in this case 4, right? So, intuitively we'd write it like this, and then we just record the prefix and the suffix. And then again, I know I'm hammering home on this, but if you actually want to make it a full zipper, you'd have to pair this whole thing with the value that we deleted.
It would be 4, the list 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Exactly.
The list containing 5.
And then again, this just proves that it works for the binary tree as well. like looking at it now, I'm just like, oh, I don't want to go through this step by step. It seems like a total drag. But what you ultimately get is, you apply the rules for the fixed point, you apply the rules for definition, you simplify it, and then ultimately what you get to is you say, okay, the context type for, the one-hole context type rather for a binary tree is a triple of a list of steps you have to take, either left, right, the value you passed, and the other tree that you don't care about, as well as the children of wherever your hole is. And this is what we went over right in the beginning. So at the very least, I'm glad we're back to where we started from. So does the big idea make sense? Now, first of all, I should say that I Googled Newton-Leibniz fan art, not knowing what I was expecting, and I found a lot of it. There are sympathizers that are like, oh, that jerk Newton, I've been pushed around my whole life, so I know how Leibniz feels. I did not expect to read the sentence, I know how Leibniz feels. But so does the big idea make sense? Now here's where we're into the heady, I don't know if any of this makes sense, and then someone's like, oh, there's a full more reason this probably does make sense. Which I don't know. But so basically in calculus, right, a derivative describes a relationship between instantaneous rates of change, right? And you can think of context kind of like that as well, right? So, and granted, I'm playing real fast and loose here, so no one try to formalize what I'm saying at all, or even check it for accuracy. But if you take if you have a function, right, and then you graph its derivative, basically what you're graphing is, right, the rates of change at every point of that function. But it kind of is, remember how we use that phrase like a return glove turned inside out? It's kind of like that, because it looks backwards and looks forwards. It says, what do I mean in terms of my, everything around me? And the interesting thing, and this is the only part that I'm confident with talking about, is this is actually similar to Leibniz's theory of omniscience or knowledge in the world, in which he has this really famous line where he talks in the monadology, where he says, yeah, monadology, full circle, cool. Where he says, if somebody knew one thing perfectly, say you knew its spatial position perfectly in the world, that would entail knowing its spatial position in relationship to everything else in the world, right? Therefore, you would know everything in the world. So to know any one thing is to know everything. And this is kind of the backbone of this idea of what a monad is. But it shows the same kind of glove turned inside out kind of relationship, in which is, if we look at something hard enough, if we can completely characterize its relationship to everything else in the universe we're talking about, say a point on a function, or say a context in a type, we actually have enough information to talk about that type, or to talk about the rest of its function. Which I think is kind of cool, that it wasn't that he had a philosophy, and I'm not saying everyone thought this, but he had a philosophy and then he tacked on some math or something like that. It was actually these two ideas fed each other in a pretty interesting way. So why should you care? And now, you're probably not going to be asked to implement a zipper tomorrow. I really doubt it. I'd be super surprised. I'm sure someone's like, actually my company makes professional zippers. We are an industrial zipper shop, all in the cloud. They're mutable. Monolith is data atomic. So that's not important. But it demonstrates kind of this value of the ability to transform between types, because now we've shown a way we can mechanically derive one type that has a special relationship to another one, namely the context from the type of which it's a context. Which means that if we had some kind of language in which we could write functions on types and get other types out, then basically we could write functions in terms of types and get for free, because again, if you can write the type signature, you've already written the program. You can get for free the function that operates on its context. So in this super magical world where we have this language that just works perfectly like this, what we can kind of do is we can meta-program context. We can say we get zippers for free as long as we've defined correctly whatever type we want to zip over. And that's kind of neat, right? Because you can start to see where if we can start thinking like that, if we improve these kind of mechanical relationships between types, once we can express those in programming languages, then we can stop having to write the boilerplate. I guess all programs become boilerplate at a certain point, right? The idea is nothing you need. But you wouldn't have to even write the thing where you say, okay, now here's the function that transforms it into its context, here's the function that operates on its context, and here's the function that puts it back. You would just write these type generic functions that operate on types, and then it could handle all the rest. Yeah, so that's cool. So how do you do this? Well, you need a language in which types are just values that you can operate on normally, because you need to be hey, what's up?
I think we'll type when we saw Haskell Viber to this last week.
Whoa! Look at that! we are innovating in real time. I mean, that makes sense. He even mentions, like in the paper, he's like, there's some Haskell stuff for this. Doesn't kind of work all the way, but it's promising, and I'm working on a thing that's promising. There's a lot of promising things. So then you write a context function that transforms types into their OneHole Context types. And then if you can write type generic functions, you can automatically transform functions that from type T to a function that's on T's context. And I wrote an example of this in Idris that I probably don't look like I have time to actually go through. But I can show you basically what it looks like, what the output looks like real quick, right? So say I have this thing called test tuple, right? And I define this just in my... oh my goodness, increase font even more. Can it handle it?
It's just... Thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go. It's the blue.
Yeah, sorry. So basically, I had to rewrite the types of it because the reflection in Idris is a little wonky, or at least I don't understand it, or it's too complicated, or all these things. But so over here, I define a, oh my goodness, can I thread this needle? There we go. Okay, so I define test, oh, this is really going to be blown up. It doesn't really matter. Test tuple is just a tuple of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? A quadruple. I don't know if that's the right word. Tetuple? Who knows? So anyway, so I have this 1, 2, 3, 4 thing, right? It was the thing that we were kind of looking at before. And its type right here, right, is integer to the fourth, right? Ref power. I thought that was like sounded mathematical, right? So it's like, its type is ref power I4, right? So I was actually able to write in Idris a function called context that operates on this type and produces another type, rather the type that's context, which allowed me to actually write a type-safe function that says I can take any tuple, a 1 tuple, a 3 tuple, a 12 tuple, right, and spit out the contextual type for that, which would at least be difficult if you didn't have something like this. And that's as far as I got. But so I could actually write, okay, put a hole in the place of 2 in this tuple, and what we get back out is, okay, so this is how you write the number 2 in Idris. Don't worry about why. But so basically, it's the way that you can ensure that a number you pass into a function is shorter than your vector so that it will be safely operated on it. It won't go out of index. Anyway, so you say, okay, we have a hole at position 2 that represents that, like, you know, left, right, or left, middle, right, or something like that, right? These are the numbers that remain, right? And then its type here, right, is, this is cool, product of 4 and I to the third. So you can actually kind of do it, right? It actually works, right? I mean, I only did it for tuples because, you know, I got things to do. But it actually does work, and it actually is possible to do, at least to a certain extent, in Idris. That's cool. So, and then finally, I want to close on this note. He says this really kind of empowering thing at the end where he's like, I don't know if this will be used for anything. I don't really know why it works. I kind of have some intuitions as to why it works. And I don't know if it's useful at all, right? But the cool thing is one only happens to open one's old school textbooks, you know, which we all use as children, almost at random, and ask, what does this mean for data types? And like, this idea was kind of inspiring to me because it made me think of, well, if you can take the derivative of these algebraic data types, what else can you do? Or what do laws that I know in, say, algebra mean when translated to types, you know? I mean, some of this stuff might not mean anything, right? Then some of it might not be a translation. For some of it, these assumptions that we're making, like you mentioned, to allow us to kind of play fast and loose, might be violated, and then, you know, they no longer work. But it's inspiring that this kind of vector of thought is there, that we can kind of attack, you know, just exploration of the space on this kind of level. And that's the thing that makes me love this paper. It's that this paper, you know, kind of inspired me to say, well, what if I take something that I understand at least decently, like types, apply something that I've totally forgotten about, like calculus, and combine the two, and you know, kind of interrogate the results. So that's DRTTOHC.
Integrated any types?
No, so he talks about this, right? He says, I don't know what integration would mean. And I think he should also about, I don't know what division would mean, because I don't really know.
So there might be an answer to that. There's a really cool paper, if you like this,
oh, yeah,
called like Algebraic Types in the field of rationals.
Okay.
So they define what negative and fractional types mean.
Oh, man! That's crazy.
Of logic variables and continuations.
Oh, Oh, what is it? What's the division? What is a fraction?
I think negative types are continuations,
Okay.
like types that expect other types.
Yeah.
And fractionals are like, so like if I have like 1 over a list, that means I have like partial information about whether or not I know something about the list.
Oh, that's cool.
Don't know that you don't know something about the list.
I don't know exactly.
One thing that I don't think you talked about is differentiating functions, which is just an exponential.
I didn't. I don't think he did either.
You can totally take a derivative of a function.
So, right. So what would that mean? What would a function be? Well, I guess a function would just be a parametric type or something like that.
So algebraically, the function type a arrow b
Right.
corresponds to b raised to the 8th power.
Right. So you're okay. I see what you're saying. Oh yeah, no, that is really awesome. Yeah, I didn't think about that. That totally is true though. Like oh cool.
So how's that related to like Oleg's general zippers, like the generic ones, like the ones that?
I have no clue.
So there's several really good, they just work for any type zipper libraries. OLEDs, don't look at OLED stuff because you'll just get trolled by trying to understand its code.
What a guy.
What do if you enjoy that?
One that I don't know if it's actively maintained, but it's insanely easy to use is there's a scrap your zippers library that just gives you a generic zipper that works for any type that has like a data instance or something.
That's cool. I bet you could.
Because all you need to have is the notion going up, down, left, and right.
Oh, I see.
Interface. And if you actually have the generics reflected so that you can see that structure, you're good.
And then if you combine that with being able to like calculate the derivative types, you don't even have to write any code ever again. Very cool. At least if you work at a zipper shop,
Professional zipper shop.
Big zip, Enterprise zippers. I like to think of this guy as
I want to invest.
this guy's an enterprise zipper right here. That's a database. Any other questions?
What's it type?
So so it's kind of like they can have religious beliefs. They're kind of like people, kind of like corporations. They're shapes. They're
Tetris, it's all Tetris.
They're endofunctors. I love that word. Anything else? Oh.
How do you deal with multi-hole context?
Yeah, that's a cool thought that I had. Is like, what if you wanted to pick out 2 holes? And I bet what you could do is you could pick out both holes independently of each other and then have the product of those 2 holes. I think that would probably be a fine.
Oleg talks about that. It's crazy.
But then how do you store it in a flat list if you have to store the context for both holes?
There are actually multiple different versions for multi-hole context, and they correspond to different types of consistency guarantees, like read committed, write committed, like transactional properties.
Cool.
But what context is the other?
Oleg, I don't know how to say his last name's website. Just basically dedicate 2 or 3 months to reading this FTP site.
How about nested?
Which one? Oleg.
You mean
Because in a
hole?
sense you have your hole.
Right.
Correct. What about another layer?
That's interesting. So it'd be like a whatever the.
Couldn't you just keep applying it? Like, store the context for the first hole, go down to
Right,
the
right,
store
and
the
then-
context within that.
Well, that which is indeed how we find values in recursive types.
Holes.
But what's the context in a hole?
Well, the context is its own context.
So actually the
Notice the
motivating
unit.
way that Oleg talked about this was like you want to have a functional file system and you want to represent your position in a directory.
ZFS, zipper file system. That exists. No, it really exists. It's really a thing. It seems to be the main thing that people use zippers for. Like if you Google like what are zippers used for, like the answers you always find are zipper file system and xmonad.
Actually, another full use case is having like a combinator library for manipulating a document. You can talk about like you have the zipper be like your
like a rope?
cursor. For like like you could actually have a proper tree AST for the document you're writing, and where your cursor position is a zipper.
rope zipper. What that would look like in fashion.
Lenses aren't.
No lens talk. Not allowed to talk about lenses right now. Save that stuff for the bar. Sorry.
Someone had the nomenclature?
Yeah, and I believe, I haven't looked at its source, but apparently that's how everyone learned Haskell, except me. But I believe that it uses zippers to manage like parenthood of windows. Cool. Did you have a question?
Just, again, the generating function thing, it's very natural why the derivative should be the OneHole context, because in combinatorics, the derivative is of a generating function of objects of length n. It's a generating function for objects of length n minus 1, where you get the second kind of object by pointing out one of the things in the first object.
Is there a paper that, or like a text we could look at to learn more about this?
Generating functionality by Will. It's free online.
Yeah, I'd actually recommend analytic combinatorics.
So I'm going to write these 2 words on the board.
Really sells it.
And
Generating functionality?
One word, yeah.
Oh.
Replacing other papers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the two that I was talking about are, wait, so I'll let you finish writing.
I think, is that right?
It's all one word and it's by Will, W-I-L.
It's all one word?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Also, analytic combinatorics. The first chapter is awesome.
Analytic.
It's also, the co-authors of the paper log log. For those of you who use that.
Parentheses, chapter 1 exclamation point. That shows that that's the best
I
one.
think there's a Coursera course that says, yeah, by the co-author Robert Tarjan. Yeah.
Or Sarah course by who?
Robert Tarjan.
T-A-R-J-N?
Oh, yes, you're correct, yeah.
So the ones I was talking about was information effects and computing in the field of rationals.
This is awesome. Information effects. And are these both Oleg?
No, those are both some Indiana guys.
Ah.
But you have to, I think Oleg's there. But so you have to read information effects to really make sense of the second one, but the first one's cool too. It's about treating forgetting things as a side effect.
Is that the Honor Savory stuff?
Yeah, savory, that's what it
He
is.
writes cool shit.
Yeah.
And one other thing I would also add is in this paper, Conor references, or Professor McBride references a paper that his father wrote about involving pattern matching and derivatives and all that kind of cool stuff. And I would actually really recommend. It's actually hosted somewhere on Professor McBride's website, but there's a really neat chapter in there about how you can use pattern matching to calculate derivatives, and it's really cool. I found it to be a very interesting read.
Regarding the direct relationship between these derivatives and actual derivatives of calculus functions, so what he was saying about generating functions is that if you have this algebraic data type and you take its the initial algebra associated to it, this is some sort of set of trees.
Okay.
And then you create a generating function out of this set of trees.
Okay.
And then the zipper actually does go to the derivative equation.
Oh, cool.
So that's the theory of species.
Yeah.
That's awesome. This is why I love this meetup, right? This is crazy. I have like 4 things.
A lot of homework.
No, I mean, my girlfriend's out of town tonight, so I know I'm doing it.
We have a question.
I was wondering, you said it works only for regular types. Does that mean that it doesn't work for a generalized graph? Is it related to the context-free kind of structure of the tree?
You know, I don't really know. I can't really speak to that. I think that, I don't know. I think that anything that you could, he means anything you can express given just, like the unit types, the empty type, sums, products, recursive types, definitions, and weakenings. Anything you can express with those tools, it works for.
Anything that looks like a power series. Yeah.
Not necessarily a description.
And one other thing I would also recommend that you look at if you just want to have some more fun is in it he also shows how the derivative of the list type. Look at the part where he shows, he's like, as a fun side note, look at how this also looks at like, you know, the summation series of like, I'm blanking on the word. Can someone help me? I need a paper. It's actually a much clearer way to figure out how to take the derivative of the list, but he says, he actually uses the word amusingly. He said, amusingly, the following power series represents list x, which is 1 plus x squared plus x cubed. Oh, so that is the connection that we were getting at. I should have put that one. I should have put that slide in there. Yeah, but that's on page 7. So if you want to kind of get a sense of what, I believe this is similar to what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's not amusing at all. Maybe it's very profoundly. The following power series represents list x. What?
Although it should be noted that not all of these things are equal if you like mod out by equivalence, right? Certain representations of lists are much more useful than others, right? Like 1 plus x squared plus x cubed is not a lot useful if I want to write a recursive math function.
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, my caveat is that, like, you know, he introduces a lot of like formalism to make kind of like cover his bases that I like left out to make it like a little, you know, more chatty. Put my hair down. Is that it? All right. Well, thanks everybody.